Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to be?
Orthodox priests picking their way through the battlements in Ukraine. A symbol of how this church is caught in the middle of an unholy conflict. The Orthodox Church is followed by the majority of people in both Russia and Ukraine. Many are devoted to it, including President Putin. Just last week, as events in Ukraine began to heat up, he retreated to a monastery for a few days' contemplation. But the crisis across the border has fractured more than the Ukrainian nation. It's caused a religious split. Some church leaders, especially the Catholics, are pushing back at Russian influence, even asking US authorities to put pressure on. It's caused a fracture that could be beyond repair. That's according to the man responsible for foreign relations in the Russian Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Hilarion Unholy. This senior priest also reveals that a historic meeting between the two leaders of the Catholic and Orthodox churches, Patriarch Kirill and the Pope, is under threat due to the actions of the Catholic leaders. Today on Talk to Al Jazeera, a rare insight into the monastery that houses the headquarters of the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow, and into the role of the men some have named Putin's God Squad. Metropolitan Hilarion Unholy, thank you very much for talking to Al Jazeera. How closely does the church and the state work? Newsweek rather cheekily called you Putin's God Squad. Is this the situation?
First of all, you should understand that the Russian Orthodox Church is not only the Church of Russia. It is also the Church of Ukraine, of Belarus, of Moldova, of Kazakhstan, of other countries of the Central Asia, of the Baltic states, as well as of Japan and of China. So it is quite a big church, which also has dioceses and parishes in 60 plus countries all over the world. So the Russian Orthodox Church and its leadership cannot identify itself with one or another government, with one or another ruler. Our tasks are broader than political tasks of a particular country. And for example, during the recent crisis between Russia and Ukraine, our church is one of the very strong unifying and peacemaking forces.
Patriarch Kirill, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, did call it a miracle, Putin's rule. Would you describe it as a miracle?
I remember very well the crisis of the 1990s, and I remember how we lived and what kind of salary we received and what level of life was available for most of the people. For example, I had 3 jobs. I was a teacher in the Moscow Theological Academy, I was a parish priest in Moscow, and I lectured in St. Tikhon's Orthodox University. My salary was $10 in the Moscow Theological Academy, $10 per month, $1 per month in the church, and $1 per month in St. Tikhon's Institute, altogether $12.
I'm guessing that doesn't go very far even in Russia when you need to feed.
This was the price of 2 kilos of cheese at that time. So I could survive with this salary more or less for 8 or 10 days. And then I had to invent some other means. For example, I translated some articles from and into English, and everybody had to fight for survival. And this continued more or less until the end of Mr. Yeltsin's rule. It was a situation of ruined economy. And it was only after Mr. Putin's coming to power that the economic situation started to improve little by little. And now the level of life is totally different. And you see that people are the majority of people are quite unanimous in their support of the actions of Mr. Putin personally and his government.
Patriarch Kirill also said that liberalism will lead to the legal collapse and then the apocalypse. Is the church in a battle with liberalism?
I believe it is. And it is not a battle of a theological or religious nature only. We are not disputing or discussing the issue of whether God exists or how we understand God. It is by and large a battle for human life and for the future of humanity. So it's not so much a theological dispute as it is an anthropological dispute. When we speak about so-called liberal values, we understand that, for example, in the liberal society, as happens in many countries of the West, the union between people of the same sex is being equated with marriage and is called marriage. We are against this because we believe that through such action, the traditional notion of marriage, of family, is destroyed. It is demolished. And we see in the current birth rate in Europe one of the direct consequences of such policy for destroying traditional values such as marriage and family.
Is there not room, though, in the world for people who are gay to be allowed to get married and have the same rights? Why would that detract from people getting married and having children? Surely one doesn't really go hand in hand with the other.
The question of rights is a rather difficult one. It can be approached from a juridical point of view, and it can be approached from a spiritual point of view. From a juridical point of view, I believe that nobody should be discriminated. And this is also the position of the Church. Every human being has the freedom of to live according to his or her choice. However, what we are against is the tendency to call such unions marriages, because we believe that marriage is a union between a man and a woman whose aim is, among others, to give birth to children. And we do not believe that homosexual couples should be given right, for example, to adopt children, because through this their way of life is, so to speak, imposed on the children and imposed on the younger generation.
In what way is it imposed?
Because they will teach their adopted children the values which they believe to be true values and upon which they build their union.
But aren't those values not to discriminate against the sort of values you're talking about? They're not going to impose on their child that they should also be gay. Surely you're not saying that.
I am saying that if we speak about a traditional family where a child has a father and a mother, this is what the Church has always supported, promoted, and blessed with its special blessing through the rite of marriage. If we speak about any other kind of union, then of course there will be no blessing from the Church. And then we speak about a very different concept, which we do not want to call marriage, because we do not believe that this is marriage.
So you don't want to call it marriage, but the Church is always was calling for a referendum on criminalising gay marriage. There's one thing being against it, but criminalising it takes it completely to another level.
No, the Church didn't call for such thing.
For a referendum?
No.
Okay.
Not the Church. It could be some private person expressing his views, but not the Church.
So you don't want to criminalise gay marriage?
No.
You just don't recognise it's the right for an individual to have that freedom?
We do not recognize it as marriage.
Okay. You touched on Ukraine a little bit. What is the Church's position on the current situation in Ukraine?
In the Ukraine, the main church, which unites the majority of Ukrainian believers, is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. It is a part of the larger Russian Orthodox Church, but it has an autonomous status. As far as the Russian Orthodox Church is concerned, the Ukrainian Church is a part of it. And so the Ukrainian citizens who are Orthodox believers, they, as I said, may have various political sympathies and orientations, and the Church would not take one or another position. There are other religious communities in the Ukraine, such as a schismatic so-called Kiev Patriarchate under Filaret Denisenko. There is also a Greek Catholic Church, so-called Uniats. They, from the very beginning of the crisis, they took one side of the battle. Our believers were on both sides, and the Church united them all, and it was only the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate which was able to unite people in spite of their political differences. And even in some cases it acted as mediators. For example, the monks of the Kievo-Pecherskaya Lavra stood for several days under rain and wind between the two sides, preventing them from coming into clash or into a battle. And in so doing, it prevented bloodshed and maybe saved human lives.
I was there in January covering the situation where the head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church had refused to accept a medal for long service from President Yanukovych.
He refused to accept this award because there's no justice in our country. Why would we receive an award from a bunch of criminals?
This medal is covered in the blood of our brothers and sisters.
Would you agree that there is a split at the moment between the Russian and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
I would describe it in different terms, because the organization which you call the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, for us it is a schismatic organization, which means that it is an inner schism within the body of the Ukrainian Orthodoxy. What we call the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, which remains in full unity with the Russian Orthodox Church. And the majority of Orthodox believers in the Ukraine belong to this canonical church. The Ukrainian church which you refer to, which is called the Patriarchate of Kiev, we do not recognize it because we believe that it was, the whole schism was illegitimate. It was promoted by the Ukrainian authorities in the beginning of the 1990s, and it's gonflated because of the help of the Ukrainian authorities.
People looking in from around the world that maybe don't understand these very specific areas that you're talking about would probably think, but surely they should be standing together in times of crisis. And really there is a crisis in Ukraine right now.
Yes.
Whenever there's blood spilt, there must be seen as a crisis. Surely they should be standing arm in arm and working together rather than talking about separation.
Yes, the problem with these communities, as well as unfortunately with the Greek Catholics, is that they do not want to stand together. On the contrary, they oppose the actions of the canonical church. They take one position in the political battle. They support only one side of this battle. And this is not the way the church is supposed to do.
President Putin said that ethnic Russians were under attack in Ukraine, and he talked about how Orthodox churches and monasteries had been violently seized. Has he talked to you and your brethren about this, about the concerns he has?
Not to me personally.
Have you heard about this? Do you believe that it's true?
Yes, of course, we receive some information. We certainly received information about various attempts to seize the church property. And we acted accordingly. And for example, there was one occasion when the Kievan-Pecherskaya Lavra was about to be seized, but it didn't happen because of common actions of the Ukrainian Orthodox people.
On the other side, the Orthodox Church is saying it's actually the Russian Orthodox groups that are seizing churches in places like Crimea. Have you also heard about that?
No, I haven't.
Do you believe that's true?
I don't.
Why would you say that? You just don't think that they would behave in that
Because
way?
I think if such thing would happen, I would have received an information about it.
Do you think the concerns that President Putin has about this area, about the churches and monasteries, the church that he feels obviously very close to, would that push him to take action across in eastern Ukraine?
This I can't tell you.
Would you hope he would take action?
I cannot speak on behalf of the Russian government. I can only speak on behalf of the Russian Orthodox Church, which, as I said, is an international church, a multi-ethnic church.
But the fear, I would have suspected, if you were worried about the people that are inside, would be bad if you were watching, not thinking that the Russian army would help these people.
I think what we definitely want to avoid is the continuation of the bloodshed.
I just wanted, one more thing I wanted to touch on this subject. There's the archpriest of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Georgy Kovalenko. He was very strident in comments he made on Facebook. I don't know if you're a reader of Facebook.
I am not.
He said, "Stop calling us fascists, Nazis and nationalists. Even in private conversation, these words kill. If we are members of one Orthodox church, if you think Kiev is the mother of Russian cities, do not inflame us. Just pray for us and listen." How do you feel about that?
That's what we are doing. We are praying for Ukraine. We are praying for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. We listen to all voices of our believers and of our priests. And this example, which you cited, is an indication of the fact that a priest from a canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, a priest whom I know very well personally, may have the position which in many ways coincides with the political position, coincides with the position of the schismatic groups. But we have also people with other positions, and all of them are within one canonical church. And I think this is what is most important for us. The church is not to divide people, but to unite people.
You touched on as well about the Catholic Church. Have the events in Ukraine affected the dialogue you've been having as a church with the Catholics?
It didn't bring positive input in our dialogue because, of course, we have a dialogue on various levels. For example, we have a theological dialogue whereby we discuss differences between our churches which have existed for more than 1,000 years. But we also have various levels of practical cooperation. And we also have a project of meeting between the Patriarch and the Pope, a project about which journalists constantly ask us. And I would like to...
you know it's on my piece of paper, obviously.
I'm sure it is already on your paper. So in anticipation of this, I would say that at some point we believed we were again close to such possibility as was planned in 1997 when there was already a time and a place agreed among the two sides, but the meeting didn't take place. Last fall, I believed, for example, that we are close to perhaps resuming the negotiations about the conditions for such meeting. But the events in the Ukraine and the actions of the Greek Catholics put us back towards the back to the times when such meeting was not possible.
What do you say the Greek Catholics have been doing? What are these actions?
They are against the Moscow Patriarchate. They want to cut the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate from the Moscow Patriarchate. They expressed these ideas openly. The leader of the Greek Catholic Church, together with the leader of the schismatic group, Filaret Denisenko, undertook several trips together, including a trip to the US, where they both visited various offices in the State Department and presented the Ukrainian case. When I mention this to my colleagues in the Vatican, they always say that, well, the Greek Catholic Church is an autonomous church, we are not controlling them and we cannot help. Well, I say the Uniatism was not our common project with us, it was your project. So if you don't control it, who should control it? If you don't control it, or if you disagree with these actions, then perhaps you can make a statement saying that we disagree with these actions, but this statement is not coming from the Vatican.
Some of the Greek Catholics in Ukraine say they accuse the Russian forces of roughing them up, of detaining them. They're even being called Vatican agents. Have you heard of such stories? Would you condone such stories?
I haven't heard of such stories.
You don't believe it's true?
I don't believe it's true.
Okay. If it was happening, would you condemn it?
We should look at the details of the situation.
Just lastly, I wanted to touch on the situation regarding Christians around the world. There are stories of persecutions of Christians in Africa, in the Middle East, and in war zones, and in today's war zones. How much can the Orthodox Church work towards stopping that happening, or maybe even work with the Catholic Church in this regard?
What is happening in various countries of the Middle East is that in a particular country there is a regime which would be considered as oppressive, as totalitarian, and with the help of Western arms, this regime is overthrown. This is what happened in Iraq, this is what happened in Libya, this is what happened in Egypt. But what comes next? This is apparently done in the name of democracy, in order to restore or to bring order in these countries. Can we say that Iraq, now 10 years later, is a democratic country where all freedoms are protected? We see that 10 years ago there were 1.5 million Christians in Iraq. There is now probably 1/10 of this population left. There are practically no Christians left in Libya. We see a constant flight of Christians from Egypt. And we see what is happening with Christian population in Syria, where rebels come to power. So it is not simply a coincidence. It is a series of events which results with genocide of the Christian population of the Middle East.
Would you be saying then that it would have been better if there had been no West intervention in the countries that you're mentioning?
I would think that if you say A, you should say B. If you take responsibility for a particular country, then you should also take responsibility for the consequences of your intervention.
So should they be doing more to help nation building? What should the West be doing in countries like, especially Iraq and Libya? Obviously Syria is still ongoing. But
I think first of all, as far as we as a church are concerned, and if we speak about the fate of Christians, I think this should be a matter of special concern for Western countries. In 2011, the European Parliament adopted a resolution on the persecution of Christians. I think it was a very important resolution, which suggested very concrete means to protect Christian population of such countries. For example, one of the suggestions was that any kind of political or economic aid to these countries by the Western countries should be given only in exchange for the guarantees for the Christian population. Unfortunately, this resolution remains on paper. It is not followed.
fascinating to talk to you. Thank you, Father, speaking to Al Jazeera.